Hey everyone, welcome back to a world where rebellion simmers beneath cobbled streets and destiny walks in worn boots. This morning, the sun rose over the kingdom like any other, but something was different. A flicker of fire in a girl's hair, a whisper of change in the wind. As one man watched, unable to look away, fate began to stir in the shadows of the Quilted Cow. Secrets are unraveling, bounties are being posted, and an ancient legacy is awakening. Stay tuned. Because this isn't just a story, it's the spark of a revolution. The map is made by yours truly. It was hideous. Pearls, emeralds, and rubies were all very beautiful creations of the nature, and yet somehow when put together, they were hideous. Ironically enough, your wedding dress was supposed to be the most beautiful dress you'd ever wear, but the way the seamstress had put together the beautiful white pearls and colorful red and green gemstones, the combination looked absolutely dreadful. If it had been up to her to design the dress, she would have cut out the rubies and stuck with the pearls and green stones. The green had a nice contrast to her velvet, smooth red hair, whereas the rubies made it look, well, less red. She gazed at the horrendous corset she was trying out for fitting. The only positive thing she could say about it so far was that it had a beautiful heart-shape cut, although even that seemed a bit too deep for her taste. She turned and swirled to see if it looked better from any other angle. Unfortunately, it only showed how the back of the corset was bedazzled with more colorful gems, like sapphires and even a few diamonds. The thought alone that she had to wear this in front of people made her want to stay in her room forever. "So how do you like it?" Her mother chimed. She stood next to her and observed her through the mirror with her hands folded over her heart. She had that adoring look in her eyes, the one she always had when her little daughter was experiencing those big life moments, such as trying out the corset for her wedding day. "It's quite something," Emea hesitantly replied and tried her best to replicate a genuine smile. "Oh, I knew you'd love it." Her mother sang and wiped away a falling tear. "You look stunning in that corset, my dear. I do think we need to pull the waist in another inch, though, and maybe the bust needs to be taken in a nudge, too." "Mom, I can barely breathe as it is," Emea said and looked at how the bust had been sewn together so tightly. It made her bosom pop and nearly fall out. They were squeezed together uncomfortably tight. Any further and I won't be able to mouth the word yes in 3 days. "It's just 1 more inch," her mother assured her and smiled lovingly. "I just want you to look perfect for your husband. I've been told he loves slim women." "Oh, wonderful," Emea muttered sarcastically. Her future husband had apparently been quite the stallion in his pubescent days, since he knew he preferred thinner women. Plural. Well, maybe if we filed down my ribcage or saw them off completely, I'll be slim enough for his liking. "Watch your mouth now, Emea," her mother said, warningly. "You know your father has spent a lot of time finding you a compatible husband. I will hear none of this no more." "You're right, I'm sorry." Emea sighed and lifted her arms when the seamstress came to adjust the corset. There was no gain in trying to make a joke around her mother. "That's better," her mother smiled and sat down in a satin-covered chair and poured herself a glass of white wine. "Now when you meet him, You shall be polite and interested in his accomplishments. Remember how I taught you that men like to be praised by their achievements. I remember, Mom, she replied and grimaced when the seamstress tugged on the corset to tighten it. She was pretty sure she just cracked a rib. Indulge him with compliments on his attainments, make sure to notice his smaller conquests, and reward him with a smile or tentative touch, she recited for the millionth time. You taught me well. So it would appear. Her mother sang and looked at her with adoration again. It was impossible to think that in just 3 short days, she would be married to a man she had never met before. At just 24 years old, she would be married, and within a few years, expected to carry his children who would become heirs to his and to her own home, Roch Fort. Her children and their children would continue the great Roch family tree, along with preserving her home and city. All of this was unimaginable, and to top it all of, she hadn't even met the man she was going to marry. The first time she would ever see him would be at the wedding, and the first words she would ever speak to him would be, yes. It's a great promise to what life with you as his wife will mean, as her father had put it. To think that her husband was some man who'd always expect her to answer his every question with yes was repulsive. Or, well, at least to a mayor it was. Tell me about him again, Mom. Emea pleaded her mother while the seamstress sewed her corset uncomfortably tight. What was he like again? Well, I've only met the man once, but from what I can tell you. Her mother started with an excited tone. He is tall and very handsome. He is very muscular as a result from all of his hard-won battles. He has thick black hair, always kept neatly, of course, a fair complexion, good sense of fashion, oh, and the best part, his eyes are a beautiful emerald green. Her mother chided and clenched her hands tightly around her goblet. Just think of your children, your red hair and his green eyes. So they will be beautiful. It was obvious her mother was more excited about her wedding than Emea herself was. She forced another smile to her face as her mother collected herself and came back down to earth. Well, that was only his appearance, Mom. I'm talking about what is he like as a person? Emea asked and turned to look at her mother. What are his accomplishments in this world? What made Dad choose him? Oh, I see. Her mother softly chuckled. Well, that's a whole other thing. From what your father has told me, his land and city has been absolutely renovated. His latest battle against the Daelon people won him great fortune, and he invested them all in his town. Your father mentioned that during his visit, he noticed that the streets were clean and the beggars were nowhere around. According to him, he is a very accomplished and likable man, her mother assured her. In fact, there were many ladies who requested his companionship. But of course, the best of the best goes to my daughter. She happily laughed and softly folded her hands. Apparently, he has also managed to completely quarantine the southern elven people on his land so that his streets are elven-free. Her mother proudly informed her. Your father knew right then that he was the man for you. Quarantined the elves? Emea said and grimaced again when the seamstress poked a needle in her. I thought that the southern elves were allowed to visit the cities if they paid for their entrance. Well, yes, but most of us don't like looking at their ghastly faces. Her mother shivered by the thought. Even if they do pay, they still remind us of their horrible doings. So he quarantined them because people didn't like to look at them. Emea asked and frowned a little. I know what they did was wrong, but I thought they had admitted their defeat and surrendered to our laws. Of course they have, but elves aren't to be trusted. They are all liars and deceitful, so your future husband found it useful to create a locked area of where the elves could live. He has put a limit to how many elves may live there, so in that way, they make sure that they never have the force or number to try and regain power. Just like Restriction Town, her mother finished and folded her hands resolutely in her lap. Emea frowned to herself as she thought of her husband-to-be's action. Elves were strange creatures and funny to look at, but after so many years of suppression, how much damage could they do? She should know the same thing applied to her. Well, all women, what with men being the stronger sex. All right, all done, the seamstress announced after cutting the last thread. Her mother immediately jumped up and awed at her daughter's supposed beauty and lovingly folded her hands near her heart. It's perfect. Just perfect. Emea forced yet another smile onto her lips and tried to be happy for herself. By all standards of the human kind, her betrothed sounded great. He was handsome, well-liked and good to his people. Then how come she couldn't see herself happily married in a few days? All right then, let's get you out of that and go get some supper. Her mother interrupted her melancholic thoughts. I'll let the kitchen know you'll be down in a second. Her mother left her room after one last lingering gaze from the door, and then left her alone with the seamstress who started cutting her out of the corset. Emea looked at herself as the corset slowly started to loosen its tight grip on her body. She wasn't the tallest woman of them all, but she definitely wasn't the smallest either. Her mother was a tall woman. So many of her genes had transferred onto her. She had been told men usually liked their women short, so it wouldn't create a logistical problem, whatever that meant. She also had broad hips and shoulders, but for some reason, a narrow waist. Which, of course, in this situation was a good thing. Her legs were long, like a runner's, and by women's standards, her hair was kept long, almost down to her waist, a waterfall of red locks. Her eyes were a golden honey color, even though her mother had dark brown eyes and her father had green. Some days, when the sun was high and she looked into the light, her eyes actually looked a bit green. Her complexion was bright and pale, thanks to all of her time spent indoors, learning what women needed to know before they were sent off to marriage. The marriage, which was now only 3 days away. Was this what her life was going to be? Emea thought as the corset slid of her body and landed in a bundle of gemstones. Living in a castle, in the shadow of a man, only there to raise his children and praise his fortune. It didn't excite her even the least. Her mother had obviously found it a happy life, even though she hadn't been able to produce any sons. Emea was the sole heir to Rochester city and fort, but because of her gender, couldn't rule. Her father had spent years searching for a compatible husband, and now she was finally getting married. It was her duty to the people in her town and her duty as a daughter to lead on the family tree. All of that responsibility made her stomach twist. Deep in her heart, she wished she wasn't born a Roch. The Roch family was close to the king and his family, and if spoken about in large crowds, always a name that was highly praised. So she couldn't let her family down, even if she did have a choice about the marriage. All she could do now was hope to make the best of her last days as an unmarried woman. Dinner was always a tense affair in the Roch house. Her father was a serious man who always kept his manners, even though they were only the three of them at the table. That meant if conversation had to be started, it was always led by him, and that usually meant talking about the state of his town or land. But of course, the upcoming wedding had brought a few more subjects to the table. Subjects Emea wished they wouldn't talk about. So her father started, after putting down his goblet of wine. "How is the dress coming along?" "Oh, it's absolutely beautiful," her mother answered before she could even open her mouth. "You should see the corset. She just looks ravishing. She'll be trying out the whole dress tomorrow, and adjustments will be made accordingly." Her mother informed her father and reassumed her dinner. "Splendid," her father grunted and wiped his mouth. "I can't wait to see the result." "Oh, you just wait and see," her mother softly chuckled. "After we've taken the waist in another inch, we'll have the perfect dress." Another inch. Emea breathed. She had to do that now since she apparently wouldn't be breathing in 3 days. "One more won't hurt," her mother said and smiled. "Now about the shoes, we still need to find a shoe that has a heel but still keeps you solid on the ground. It never was your forte to walk in high heels." She chuckled and sipped her wine. Emea just poked her veal and tried to find any appetite that she might have reserved. She was quite certain that yet another inch would in fact hurt. "Good, good," her father chimed. "How about the kitchen? Have they been informed about the menu?" "All sorted with the chef this morning," her mother promptly replied. "Father," Emea burst in and looked at her father. "Might I ask you something?" Her father chewed his steak before answering. "What is it, my dearest?" "Well," Emea sat up straighter and cleared her throat before continuing. "I was wondering if I might visit the market tomorrow morning. Since the dress is mostly done and everything with the wedding is being taken care of, I wondered if I might go search the market for some antique bracelets to go with the dress." Her father sipped his goblet for a long time with a thoughtful expression on his face. Then, when he finally put his goblet down, he replied, "Well, I suppose you may. I'll have 2 of the guards stand by to escort you to town tomorrow." He finished and filled his mouth with his red steak. Conversations started again, but Emea didn't participate. When she couldn't stand their wedding talk anymore, she stood up to leave the table. "Are you full, dear?" her mother said as Emea made ready to leave. "You hardly ate anything." She hesitantly begun, "Well, I want to be able to fit into my dress, especially if we're having it sewn even tighter." She lied and tried to make a laugh. It came out stiff. "Well, all right then," her mother smiled. "Best head off to bed then if you're heading to the market tomorrow. Remember, no silver or bronze, only gold bracelets and something with emeralds or diamonds." Her mother called after her as Emea headed for the door. She escaped their endless wedding mania and closed the door to her room. Thankfully, the maids had cleared her room from all the wedding stuff, so she joyfully collapsed on her bed. This day had been exhausting. Tomorrow she would spend the whole day browsing the town, thinking about anything but her upcoming wedding. Heck, she might even find some interesting gossip that might bring her mind to other things. Well, that's what she needed, a good distraction. The market was always a vivid, colorful place. Salesmen and passing people always tried to sell off anything they could for a penny. Women waved their scarves around and tried to pass it off as silk, while men ran around with various belts, knives, and daggers, and claimed it was the highest quality. She supposed to the trained eye that everything was very invaluable, but for the individual peasant, it was all they had to make for a living. And that was why Emea loved shopping in the market. She loved supporting the local salesmen and women who had spent days perfecting their merchandise. That meant that each piece they sold were unique, a quality Emea valued above all else. "Try this one," the saleswoman smiled and handed Emea a different scarf from the one she was trying on. "It complements your beautiful hair better than the blue." "You can have it for free, me lady." The woman smiled, overwhelmed, and held out more scarves. All of them for free. "No, I can't accept that," Emea firmly stated and frowned. "I want to pay for your needlework." "How much?" she asked again while gesturing to the guards to bring forth the coin pouch. "Oh," the woman said and looked nervously at her scarves. "Would 3 coins be decent?" "I'll pay you 5, Emea said as the guard handed her the coin pouch. She fished out 5 shining coins and held it out to her. "Just because you treat me so well every time." She smiled when the poor woman looked moved by her simple statement. With a shaking hand, the woman accepted the coins and clutched them to her chest, as if she had never accepted such valuable payment before. Perhaps that was the actual case. "I love paying for a good handcraft." Emea smiled and watched how the woman locked the coins safely away in a little wooden chest. "I'll see you next time." But as she started walking away from the booth, she realized that that might not be true. Marriage meant that she could only come to the market with her husband, and that was if he was feeling generous. She would have to use money from his pouch and only buy what he thought was commendable. Marriage, there it was again. She had tried her best all day to forget about it, but no matter what she did, it kept popping up. Then, of course, the giant banners and posters around the town announcing her betrothal weren't exactly helpful. It appeared that the world was forcing her to acknowledge her soon-to-be future as a married woman. "I'm not letting it ruin my last day as unwed," Emea fiercely thought and took a deep, confident breath. "Just let me be free today." "Not as it sounds, my good man. It's the start of a whole new life." "Aye, it's true. Wouldn't you like to live in a world where you can speak your mind without being hanged?" Emea looked over her shoulder and found 2 men discussing something with a salesman. Emea only caught the brim of the conversation, but it had already piqued her interest. What was that thing about speaking your mind? She wondered. One of the men, the older-looking one with black hair and a beard, crossed his arms and looked confidently at the salesman who was peeling his potatoes. What if ye could walk straight up to any man, even a man with a higher rank, and tell him exactly how ye felt about our society? He said and raised a bushy brow. Wouldn't that be something? It most certainly would. Amaya thought and carefully listened. She snugged closer to the two men by pretending to be interested in the next booth's merchandise. Well, I suppose it would be great if I could discuss the recent rise in the taxes. The salesman hesitantly replied to the bearded man and thoughtfully scratched the back of his head. But why do you think anyone would listen to a simple salesman like myself? Aha, the bearded man exclaimed and pointed a finger in the air. Exactly our point. We want our world to be a place where ye rank doesn't matter. If ye have something to say, ye should speak. Ye shouldn't be tied down by the laws of hierarchy. Imagine a place where your sons and daughters can live a life without the worry of being slain for speaking over themselves. The younger-looking guy spoke up. He looked to be no older than Emea. He had youthful, short black hair and wore a tunic under his light leather armor. We want everyone to be welcome in our new world. New laws, new taxes, new customs. And that's just the beginning. The beginning, the salesman said and looked astounded. What else do you have in mind? Well, join us at the tavern later and we'll tell ye all about it, the bearded man said and laughed hoarsely. I promise ye, it'll be worth ye time. Emea was seriously getting curious. What were they talking about? A new world? How was that going to be possible? And why were they trying to convince a simple farmer of this? Were they recruiting for something? The curiosity was killing her. She carefully took a shy look towards the men who politely bid the salesman farewell and continued their way. Emea was determined to figure out what they had been talking about. She had finally found something to take her mind off things, and this was more than she had expected. She had to follow them, and then maybe she'd get a chance to talk to them. She just had to know. But the guards assigned to watch her were standing by a few feet away and would never let her talk to another man alone, especially this close to her wedding. It was frowned upon for a betrothed woman to be seen talking to another man without any chaperone. She would just have to let it slide then. Or use one of her famous stunts. Ah, yes, in her younger days, Emea had been quite the little troublemaker. She had always tried to run away from the guards whenever she could so she could explore the market for herself. But as she grew older, a certain behavior was expected from her, and so she had been forced to stop her small escapades. It seemed she would have to use her cleverness one last time. She carefully considered her options as she casually strolled down the streets, keeping the two gentlemen in eyesight at all time. There were so many things she could do to cause a distraction, but it needed to be real this time. She couldn't just knock over a cart with fruits like she had done when younger. No, she needed something brilliantly thought through. And she knew just the thing. Emea started whistling to herself while she discreetly slid her gold bracelet off her wrist and concealed it in her gown until the moment was right. She needed the timing to be perfect. She walked past a farmer who was stacking a large amount of hay onto his wagon and chose that exact moment to pretend to fall. She let out a surprised yelp and landed in the hay, quickly digging her gold bracelet deep into the haystack. Oh my. Milady, the guards both shouted and rushed to her side. They quickly got her out of the hay and onto her feet. Milady, are you all right? Are you hurt? Oh my gosh, I am so clumsy. Emea said and brushed some hay out of her dress and hair. I don't think I've taken harm. Oh, no. She theatrically cried and looked at her wrist. The guards gasped and looked worried at her. What is it, milady? Have you hurt yourself? My bracelet. My gold bracelet. I lost it. It must have fallen into the hay. She exclaimed and put on a sad face for good measure. It was my grandmother's. If I lose it, my mother will never forgive me. The guards scrambled on their feet and suddenly seemed feverish. Don't worry, milady. We'll find your bracelet. And with that, they both jumped into the hay. They were both so panicked, they didn't even think to watch her. Their minds were completely focused on the irreplaceable bracelet, and so they didn't even notice Emea sneak off. Once she was far away enough, she broke into a laughing fit and didn't even try to conceal it. How come guards were so dumb? Either that or she was just a natural actress. She quickly scurried after the two men who she had seen walk down a different street. She caught up with them by a farmer who was cleaning out his horse stable. She slowed down her pace and casually strolled up to a sales booth that sold beautiful seashell ornaments. How about if ye son is recruited into the army and the poor lad is too young to become a warrior? She heard the bearded man say to the farmer who had stopped shoveling to listen to them. He'll be taken to Senwatros to train, and that'll be the last ye'll ever see of him. We don't want that for our sons and our future, the man said and crossed his arms. Me sweet wife at home has our babe in her belly. I want a world where me young lad can live safely, without having to fear being recruited for the army. I want that too, my good man, the farmer said and looked thoughtful. Say, what did you say your name was? Emea looked at the younger guy who seemed to be staying in the back this time. He was paying interest to the streets, as if scouting for their next target. And that's when his eyes landed on Emea's. Emea quickly looked away and pretended to be very interested in a seashell necklace. Damn it, she thought. He had probably seen her starring him. She just hoped he didn't take it offensive. Excuse me, fair lady, she heard someone say behind her. She quickly turned around and found the young black-haired guy standing there, smiling at her, holding a small flower in his hand. Oh my, she gasped and involuntarily blushed when he presented it to her. My name is Dashel, but you can call me Dash if you prefer. He smiled and crossed his arms. Say, what is a beautiful woman like yourself doing walking around here alone? Emea had to quickly think of a good answer before replying. I'm just outstretching my legs from sewing. I'm a seamstress, she lied and nervously smiled back to Dash. There was no way she could tell him who she really was, seen as though he wasn't allowed to talk to her unaccompanied. So seamstress was a great lie. It would also explain why her dress was so fancy. A very beautiful seamstress, Dash smiled and chuckled shortly. He seemed to buy the lie. May I ask of your name? It's... Emea hesitated when she in the corner of her eye saw a giant banner announcing her name and betrothal. He might not know who she was right now, but if she told him her name, he sure as hell would, and she was absolutely certain that he would scurry away if he knew she was engaged. My name is M. Emea smiled and held out her hand. It's very nice to meet you, Dash. Dash echoed and softly took her hand. Pleasure is mine. He placed a polite kiss on her hand before releasing it. So where are you from, M? Emea cleared her throat and gathered all of her courage. She was talking to him, a man, without any chaperone to steer the conversation. This was all very new to her, and she was uncertain how to do this. Well, I'm from here, she nervously started. Rochester City. How about you? I don't believe I've seen you in Rochester before, she said when she realized that was true. She knew almost everyone in Rochester, so he had to be from out of town. Indeed, I'm not from Rochester, Dash chuckled, but I wish I was. I stem from Johann City, down south from here, he told while casually smiling at her. Johann is not as rich as Rochester. The streets here are much cleaner, not to mention your sewage system is much better than Johann's. Oh, I can't imagine how that must be, Emea said. If only we peasants could do something about that. She purposely let the sentence hang in the air and hoped he would pick up the thread. Hopefully, he would start talking about whatever him and his friend were going on about. He didn't disappoint. Well, as a matter of fact, Dash smiled and looked both ways before leaning in towards her. Can you keep a secret? Emea felt the curiosity spike in her stomach, and she leaned in, too. Of course. Dashel smirked and licked his lips. Me and a couple of other men are starting this rebellion against the current rules. We've had enough of poor treatment and bad neighborhoods. Really? Emea asked and looked genuinely surprised. Like how? Well, Dash said and looked over his shoulder. See that man over there? The one with the beard. He pointed towards the man she had seen him with before. That's Hank. He's in charge of this whole thing. We've been traveling around different cities to spread the message of our plans and ask more people to join us, he told. But Rochester has given us no one so far, unfortunately. It seems the city is pretty much fine with the laws that is, he chuckled and shook his head. That's unbelievable, Emea exclaimed, keeping her voice hushed. So what are the changes you would make? Well, to name a few. Dash started and smiled confidently. We want to end the regime that forces young boys and men into war. We want the taxes lowered, laws to change, and above all, he said and looked holy, we want the current hierarchy to end. The hierarchy, Emea asked and frowned. In what way? We're tired of being frowned upon whenever we try to voice our opinions, Dash said and gritted his teeth. Men of my standards, for example, could never be allowed to talk to the owner of this city without getting a massive beating from his puppets. Emea assumed the puppets he was referring to were the guards who was currently waist-deep in hay, searching for her gold bracelet. I can imagine that being annoying. She agreed and crossed her arms. So what do you plan on doing to achieve this? Hopefully, we get enough men to support our idea to catch the king's attention. From then on, we hope that the king will either see our side of the story or prepare for the inevitable, Dash soberly said. Which is? Emea said, almost forgetting to breathe from pure excitement. War, Dashel said and pressed his lips together. If he won't listen to the people, we will make him listen. If he is the king and ruler, then he must give the people what they want, and he hasn't. So we are going to take it ourselves. Emea gulped down heavily. They wanted war. They were starting a rebellion, and the end result could be war. She had been obsessing about a wedding, and now it would seem the whole kingdom could be facing a war. So the question was, which side was she on? In this new world you plan on creating, Emea hesitantly asked Dashiell when one thing was bugging her mind. Do you think that women could have a voice there? Dashiell seemed to be genuinely surprised and raised a thoughtful brow. I've never thought about it. Now that you mentioned it, I suppose that women should be welcome to speak, too, he said after a moment of thoughtfulness. After all, we want justice for all mankind. Her heart jumped a mile. If there was a possible future that involved women's rights, she wanted to be a part of that. She knew that war was her least favorite thing in the world, but sometimes war was needed to change things. Especially when an ignorant king possessed the throne. Men like King Ragnar was the reason why Emea hated high-ranked men. Ragnar neglected the smaller, non-profitable cities, and thus had caused those cities to almost demise in poverty. He only cared about the larger cities like Callendale or Quail, the big ones that contributed most to his capital. Of course, Rochas was amongst the favorite three, and that only emphasized Emea's importance. If she had to reign with her future husband, that meant that she would one day have to pick out the next generation of warriors. Young boys from the age of 13 to 18 would be sent away to Senwitros' capital and get brutally trained to murder other boys. King Ragnar had set the current laws, and no one was doing anything to change them. They could be sparing thousands of innocent lives, but they still chose to maintain the law. Emea had met the king many times over the years, in the company of her father. She knew right from the start she didn't like him. He was an arrogant, cocky man who only cared about his empire, fortune, and busty women. So no matter how traitorous it sounded, Emea agreed with Dash. They needed war, and they needed a new king, but that meant declaring treason. Perhaps that was why him and Hank were spreading the word silently. It sounds like you got your work cut out for you, Emea replied, releasing a breath. I would love to live in your new world one day. You shall be most welcome. Dash smiled and tipped his head a little, but from where we are now, it could take years. The men we talk to are simple farmers who have families to look after. They may believe in our cause, but they may not be willing to join us. He sighed and scratched his neck. Rochas is too rich, I'm afraid, so we'll be leaving in the morrow. Too rich? Emea asked, confused. She didn't know that a city could be too rich. Most people here haven't suffered the circumstances as much as they would have in other cities. Dash patiently explained. Rochas has great tradesmen and low crime rate, not like in cities as Bart or Johan. So they don't care as much, he shrugged. So that's why we've decided to leave for Bart as soon as dawn rises tomorrow. Dash finished and sighed lightly. We'll have more luck there, I'm sure. Oh, Emea nodded and looked at her feet. She never would have thought that her father's good treatment of the city could turn out to be a bad thing. Well, I hope you have luck in your endeavors. She smiled bleakly when she realized she wouldn't be seeing more of him. She liked him. He was the first decent, well-behaved man she had met in a long time. Well, if you'd like, You could come with us. Dash proposed and raised a suggestive brow. Your company would most definitely be welcome. What? Emea gasped. Oh, Lord, no, I didn't mean. Dash feverishly started when he mistook her shock for something else. That sounded better in my head. I only meant that if you believe in our cause, you should join us. Help spread the message and nothing more, he emphasized frantically. The poor guy was afraid Emea mistook his offer as something indiscreet. She couldn't help but choke on a laughter as he continued to try and recover from his mistake. He stopped and blushed when her laughter bubbled over. It's all right, she assured him and tried to stifle her giggling. I know you didn't mean anything wrong. You don't strike me as that sort of man. She smiled while Dash exhaled from obvious relief. Thank the gods, he sighed and shook his head. I always forget to think before I speak. My mother always said I had the manners of a troublemaker. He gingerly smiled while he awkwardly scratched the back of his neck. Your manners are fine, Emea assured him with a smile. The only reason I was so shocked was because I couldn't fathom that you would like me to join you. She explained, I mean, I am a woman. Won't that harm your campaign? Not if we fight for a free land, Dash pointed out. Come to think of it, I can't believe we haven't thought of bringing along woman on our trip sooner. Hank over there always says his wife is the smartest thing in this world. He chuckled and glanced towards Hank, who was still chatting with the farmer. I think that if the message comes from a milder voice, it might bring more men to listen. Emea thought about it for a moment. She would love to travel around the kingdom and spread the message of the revolution, and in another life she would have. But unfortunately, this was her life, and she had responsibilities. I would love to join you. She meekly smiled when Dashiell's face lit up, but I can't. His face immediately dropped to a frown. Why? He asked with a boyish pout and looked saddened into her eyes. What's keeping you here? What was she supposed to say? She hated lying to someone this honest and good-hearted. He deserved the truth, but she couldn't tell him. Not all of it anyway. I can't leave my parents with all the responsibility, she finally said. I'm all they've got. If I leave, I not only leave Rochas, but also leave my heritage. Your heritage, Dash said and frowned confused. Didn't you say you were a seamstress? I am, Emea quickly said and looked at her feet, and I have to take over the shop when they're gone. Damn it, that was close. Ah, I see, Dash said and sighed. Well, in any case, it was nice meeting you. He then smiled at her and took her palm. And I hope it will not be our last. I hope so, too. Emea smiled back as he kissed the top of her hand. If you should, however, change your mind, Dashiell said after releasing her hand. We'll be staying in Bart for 5 days. If by any chance you feel like changing the world, come find us. Emea smiled, not knowing what to say. She wished she could come. She longed for an adventure more exciting than her current life, but guilt would eat her up. I will if I do. Dashiell bowed his farewell and returned to his friend Hank, who had finished up with the farmer. Emea looked after both of them while they slandered down the street, talking lively to each other. And that was that, she thought when she turned to walk back to her guards who was probably searching for her. Her last adventure was over, and by this time tomorrow, she would be fitting her dress for the finale time, before the wedding in 2 days. And so she would get married. And just one more flower right there, her mother corrected the florist who was arranging her bouquet. We don't want any gaps, just pack them in there. Mother, let the florist do her job. I'm sure she knows what she's doing. Emea drawled when her mother kept stepping in to do her job. I need you to help me with this shoe buckle. Her mother finally gave up her flustering and rushed to her daughter's side. Of course, my dear, hold out your foot for me. The shoes, Mother. They hurt. Emea grimaced when her mother tightened the buckle. Are they supposed to be so tight? Of course they are. We don't want them to fall off your feet and cause you to trip, her mother replied and chuckled fondly. Don't worry, I've got everything under control. Though she didn't doubt that. There, her mother smiled and stood up to admire her daughter. You look so beautiful, sweetheart. Oh, I think I am going to cry. Mom, Emea flatly replied and looked at how a little tear ran down her cheek. It's not until tomorrow you get to cry. Remember, this is just my finale fitting. Oh, but you look so stunning in that dress, and now with your jewelry. You just look so. I get it, I'm beautiful. Can we move on now? Emea snapped and sighed by the look of herself in the mirror. She was absolutely nowhere near beautiful, and her mother couldn't tell because she was so fed up with wedding jitters. All right, I'll get it together, her mother finally said and dried her face with the corner of her sleeve. Let me see you walk in your shoes. Emea took a deep breath and carefully set one foot in front of the other. The shoes were at least one size too small, and just like her dress, they were way too tight. It hurt to walk, just as it hurt to breathe. Honey, could you try not and grimace when you walk? Her mother chimed with a concentrated look. The frown makes for a very unattractive bride. Sorry, Mother, Emea said through gritted teeth and pressed her lips firmly together when a curse was about to make its way to her tongue. She very well knew her mother wasn't the reason for her frustration, though she wasn't any help either. Perfect, her mother sang and clapped her hands together. I think that will do for today. Save the rest of your strength for tomorrow. Oh, thank God. Emea sighed and quickly headed for the closest chair and sat down. 3 steps in those shoes had nearly killed her. How would tomorrow go? Her mother helped her out of the shoes while the seamstress untied her corset and helped her out of the dress. It felt good to get out of all that tight clothing, and she felt thankful as she slid into her nightgown. Despite her mother's many attempts of getting her to wear appropriate clothes, Emea had always preferred simpler dresses over gowns. All that costume, and for what? To look good for a man she didn't even know yet. Get into bed while I talk to the florist outside, her mother ordered her while her and the seamstress folded everything neatly away for tomorrow. I'll just be a moment. Emea jumped into her bed, making a chaos of red hair fly behind her. She bundled up in her bedsheets and covers, realizing just now how much she loved sleeping in her own bed. She loved the space, and she loved having everything to herself. Tomorrow her life changed. Right from her bed to her clothes to her own habits. All of it gone. The florist and her mother, along with the seamstress, left her room, and gave her the blessing of loneliness for a short moment. The day had passed by so quickly. Yesterday had been so exciting with meeting Dashiell and learning about the rebellion and all that, but today had gone by so fast, she swore the sun was rushing more than usual. Suddenly she couldn't even believe that the day was gone, and that when she was awoken tomorrow, she was going to get married. Marriage, marriage, marriage. Her whole life was about getting married. It was driving her crazy. She wished she could grow back down to childhood again and experience it all over. Everything felt as if she had taken it for granted as she watched the sun set behind the mountains from her window. In that moment, she realized she might as well have been preparing for her death. It would all end tomorrow. The door opened and her mother stepped in, all ready for bed. "Will you tell me a story?" Emea asked and put a pout on her face. "Emea." Her mother chuckled and shook her head. "You are 24, you are not a child anymore." "Just one last time." Emea begged and folded her hands, "Please. Tomorrow you're saying goodbye to your daughter. Be my mother one last time." Her mother paused as a look of nostalgia came over her face. Her eyes suddenly became very blank as she looked upon her daughter. Emea could tell what she was thinking. She started blinking rapidly and then looked away. "Oh, all right then, sweetheart, for the last time." "What story should it be then?" her mother asked and gently stroked her hair. "You know which one," Emea said and grinned. "But you have heard that one 1,000,000 times before." "Please, Mom." All right, she sighed. "One last time for my daughter." She then cleared her throat and started her story. Once upon a time, the kingdom of Senworth was a land of dysfunction and mayhem. Humans and elves walked side by side and fought for the right to rule. Dragons roamed the skies and created chaos, killing humans by the thousands with their scorching fires. For a long time, this was the way the world functioned, until one fateful night, when our king was assassinated in cold blood. Though it could never be proven, it was certain it had been the act of a vicious elf. A golden arrow with a diamond tip pierced the old king's heart, leaving his son to claim the throne. The new king swore to revenge his father's murder and bring death to all the elves. And thus began the war we today know as the Great War. The years ahead that followed were the bloodiest of all of history. Men were killed, women were raped, and children were captured. The northern elves were the strongest of the elven kind, and when they realized they were outnumbered, they decided to team up with the mighty magical dragons. The southern elves fled to the southern islands when even they became scared of the northern elves and their companionship with the dragons. It was believed that the northern elves could harness the dragon's magic and use it to create great storms and other foul sorcery. They rode the dragons' backs through the air and blazed fire and magic down upon helpless peasants who in their last hour never saw the giant beast coming before it was too late. The king's men were fighting day and night to keep the humans safe, but the elves were never satisfied with their killings. However, one night, which changed history to life as we know it today, the young king sent an ambush into every village and city and knocked down every door. Village by village, the army slaughtered every elf they found and killed their dragons with their heavy swords. Even creatures as mighty as the dragons have a soft spot, and the warriors found theirs. A dragon's egg is its most precious love, and the young king knew this. He ordered his men to crush the eggs and then slay the grieving dragons, thus destroying the northern elves' strongest defense. The northern elves then begun to fear humans so much, they fled into the cold north where they sought shelter in the mountains. The southern elves who had fled were captured and mostly slain, except for the ones who surrendered and agreed to live according to human laws and restrictions. But even as the battle was won, our wise king knew that even though they were safe, he couldn't allow the remaining northern elves to stay in the north. They could regain their strength and numbers, and one day start a war even bloodier than that one. So the king made a wise decision and hunted down the last of the northern elves through the bitter north. The expedition lasted years. In the meantime, the king built up a fortress he named Restriction Town, where southern elves could be kept under control. They were allowed to roam the free places of the kingdom, but never enter a city without a price that was said that had to be paid for the damage they and their cousins had made. When the army returned from the north years later, they brought back great news. The last northern elf had fallen, sitting on top of his dead dragon. The kingdom celebrated that day as the day the last elf and dragon had fallen and called it the Day of Redemption. The old king was forever known as the savior of the kingdom, and is today buried in a gold casket embedded with diamonds and rubies. In his hand, he holds the arrow he was killed with, to remind all that his death started the beginning of a new world, a kingdom that was finally in order, the way it should be. His son rules today by his laws, and still to this day keeps us safe from all evil. Her mother finished with a smile and stroked Imea's cheek. Imea looked at her mother with a little frown. So the warriors who went into the north managed to kill the last of the northern elves. Yes, they did, her mother replied while tucking her in. They killed them to extinction, same as the dragons. The only elves alive today are the few southern elves that we keep under strict observations. I wonder if we'll ever find out if the arrow really belonged to an elf. Imea murmured and blinked tiredly. It did, my dear, her mother said and stroked her head again. There was no doubt about it. No human could have made that shot. It could have been a skillful peasant or something. She mumbled and yawned. Someone who held a serious grudge. Why would a human kill their own king? And where would a peasant find a diamond? Her mother replied with a tone that ended that discussion. Now you have to get some sleep. Big day tomorrow, remember. She smiled and poked Imea's nose. Imea forced a little smile to her lip as her mother blew out the last candle. Good night, mother. Good night, my beautiful daughter, her mother said from the door. I'll see you early tomorrow. She closed the door behind her, and Imea closed her eyes to sleep. But as the time went by, she couldn't find any rest. How could she? Her wedding was tomorrow, and she was freaking out. She couldn't get married. She wouldn't. She wasn't ready, she was too young. She couldn't help that she was born a Roch. She didn't want this responsibility. It wasn't fair. She then started thinking about what that guy, Dashiell, at the market had said to her. Was it really possible that they were starting a rebellion? that they were fighting for equality for both men and women. They wanted their rights as humans to speak and live the way they wanted. Did that mean women could choose whom they'd marry? She then started thinking about her mother's story. The rules and laws had been this way for decades and had only been strengthened after the war. The rules weren't there to protect them. They were there to restrain them. And who were the men to decide that women were unfit to rule? Most women she knew were quite intelligent, some even strong. Who was to say that they couldn't make their own decisions or rule a country as well as any man? So if these men really wanted a change in the world, why shouldn't she fight alongside them? She could be a great asset to their rebellion, and if she could help them in any way, why shouldn't she? Wait, what was she thinking? Was she considering running away the night before her wedding? She had to be losing her mind. She couldn't actually be thinking about bailing and leaving her parents behind to fight with a group of men she barely knew. Yes, she was in fact losing her mind. Or maybe she was gaining perspective. All her life, her decisions had been made for her. She never got to choose her own furniture, hairstyle, wardrobe, or her own husband. But right now, she had a choice to make. She could choose to stay and live a life restrained by the laws and rules set by men, or she could run off and join the rebellion and maybe change the world, and maybe get killed in the process. She knew in her heart what she wanted. Her heart never lied. She knew that she would rather die a virgin while fighting for a good cause than live in a marriage with a man who would practically own her. She had definitely lost her mind, she thought as she threw her covers off and started dressing again. She was actually going to do this. She was running away. She started to think practical about what she should pack while trying to keep the guilt from reaching her stomach. Her parents would be devastated, disappointed more than anything. If she ever made it back alive, she doubted she would ever be accepted as their daughter again. Just pack, she thought, and gave herself a mental slap. She found a satchel and started grabbing the necessary things she knew she would need. A spare dress, spare shoes, a few cloths for washing, and a couple of tinctures from her medicine cabinet that could treat scrapes or infected wounds. She knew that she wouldn't make it without at least getting a few cuts and bruises. But then, as she hesitated for a moment, she realized she wouldn't even get that far when she didn't have any money. The world ran on money, money that women weren't allowed to have. The only other valuable thing she knew could work as payment as well were gemstones. She made a quick decision and packed a few of her most valuable bracelets, necklaces, and earrings, and folded them securely in a spare cloth. She was just about to strap on her shoes when her wedding corset glinted in the illuminating moonlight. It looked so delicate the way it just lay there on her wooden chest. It was still as hideous as ever, but it suddenly occurred to her that the gems on it might be worth a lot. Since she wasn't going to wear that ever again, it had no purpose anymore. So after a short decision, she crammed the corset into the bag as well. Who would have thought her wedding corset could actually come in handy? Now came the guilt part. She was all ready to sneak off into the night, but she couldn't stop thinking about her parents. What would happen tomorrow when her mother came to wake her up and found an empty bed? She would break down. So she had to leave a note. Emea went to her desk and pulled the drawer open, fishing out a piece of parchment, along with her quill and ink, before sitting down in her chair. As she dipped her quill in the ink and brought the tip to the parchment, she realized she didn't have a clue what to write. What was she supposed to say? "I've run off because I don't want to get married to a stranger." Hardly the best way to say goodbye. And that's when she realized this could very well be the last thing she would ever say to them. This letter was quickly becoming the most difficult one she would ever have to write. She was saying farewell to her parents, to her home. After a long, hard time of thinking, she wrote down the only thing she thought she could say. Anything else would be too painful. She held the letter up and looked at her last words. "Mother, Father, I can't do this. I'm sorry, please forgive me. It's not your fault, I love you." It wasn't much, but it was the best she could do. She didn't want to start explaining herself to them. She knew they would never understand anyway. She took one last look at it before she folded it up and placed it on her bed. Her mom would find it in the morning and probably cry by the side of the bed. The image was becoming too unbearable and made her want to not go, so Emea forced herself to look away and instead made ready to go. She tied her cloak securely around her neck before throwing her satchel over her shoulder. She then looked one last time at the room she grew up in. By home, she whispered and looked at the dark and now empty room she had spent most of her life in. "I'll miss you." She softly opened her door and tried her best not to make it squeak. She tiptoed out of the room and closed her door for perhaps the last time. As she walked down the hallway, she was careful not to get heard or seen by the late working servants or guardsmen. They stood guard by the entry of the fort and all around the walls to the moat. Luckily, she wasn't heading towards the main entry. In her adolescent days, upon one of her many attempts of getting out of the castle, she had stumbled upon a secret passage that was triggered by pulling a small gargoyle. It had led her all the way out of the fort to the other side of the moat. It went underground and was handmade by, she had to assume, one of her predecessors. Her father had never mentioned this escape route, so she had to assume he didn't know about it, as did no one else in the castle. It wasn't on any maps of the fort, so Emea had figured it was a secret passage that only her and her ancestors knew about. The only difficult part about it was getting to the gargoyle. The hallway where the passage was right up to the kitchen, and that was where most of the staff currently were. The wedding was tomorrow, and the kitchen was working all night to prepare the food and pastry. They ran back and forth between the dining hall and ballroom with all sorts of things for the wedding. Emea knew it would be difficult to get through unseen. All she needed was a little distraction and a little bit of luck. Even from outside the castle, she could still hear the chef crying on about who had let the dogs into the kitchen. How they had managed to get themselves free from their leashes was a mystery to all except Emea, who was currently walking a steady pace towards the town. Making a distraction hadn't been hard. It was really the dogs who had done most of the job. All she had to do was untie their leash, lead them in the right direction, and from there, they had done the rest. A kitchen full of delicious-smelling treats was enough to drive any canine crazy. She had waited for the perfect moment in all the chaos to slip through the passage and get away without being noticed. Now she was finally on her way, and she could feel her confidence growing with each blow from the wind. She had never felt this free before. She was out at night, unaccompanied by anyone, and no one was there to tell her she couldn't. For the first time in her life, she was her own master, and she already loved the feeling. The town wasn't far away. After all, Rochefort was a part of the city, but was nonetheless placed a few yards from the town. It was from the times where the city had been a smelly place, and rich people like herself shouldn't have to smell that. Today, Rochefort City was one of the few crime-free and pretty towns around the kingdom. Her father's wealth had helped clean up the city, much like her ex-fiancé had done with his. She reached the city gates within 10 minutes and was glad to see that the gate was still open. All cities had a midnight curfew where all gates, shops, and taverns had to be closed for the night. Luckily, it wasn't too late yet. The streets were mostly empty by now, but who was to say she was out of luck? Emea looked around the square for any tradesmen or mercenaries who might be looking to earn a few coins. She had to get to Bart City, where the young guy, Dashiell, had said they would be staying for a couple of days. Bart City was the neighbor city to Rochefort, but still kind of far away. It would be too exhausting and too dangerous to walk there at night, so she had to hitch a ride from someone who was heading that way. And who better to ask than a tradesman or farmer who might be wanting to sell his stuff in a different city? Emea turned a corner and found exactly what she was looking for. An older man who was loading a wagon with large sacks of what looked to be bags of flour. His horse was tied up ahead, so it was obvious he was leaving soon. Emea kept calm as she approached the man, taking a deep breath before saying, "Excuse me, sir." The man hadn't noticed her just yet and looked up with a surprised glare. "By gods, what is a woman doing out this late?" he exclaimed and looked behind her. "You can't be all alone, can you?" "I'm looking for a ride," Emea said, glad to see he didn't recognize her. He obviously wasn't from Rochefort then, or maybe he just couldn't tell in the dim light from the moon. "Could I by any chance hitch a ride out of town?" The man frowned and scratched his chin before hesitantly asking, "Are you running from something? That would explain why you'd be out so late." "I'm just looking for something elsewhere," Emea hesitantly replied and avoided the man's inspecting glare. "Now, how about that ride?" The man seemed to drop the subject and instead looked at her small figure. "Well, I suppose you could fit on the wagon. Where are you heading?" "Bart City," she quickly replied and felt a nervous pull in her stomach. "Would you by any chance be heading there?" "Well, I'll certainly be passing through, but I'm not staying," the man responded and threw another bag of flour on the wagon. "And if I wear you, neither would I. Bart is not as friendly as Rochefort, you know," the man told her and gave her a pointed stare. "Well, actually," the man begun again after giving another inspecting glare at her satchel, "I didn't say the ride was for free. You look like a woman who might have something valuable to trade an old farmer." He made a subtle gesture towards her stuffed satchel, and Emea realized what he was implying. "Oh, I see," Emea said and looked at her bag. "That won't be a problem." It appeared she would already have to use her fortune. She opened her bag and ripped off 3 beautiful red rubies from her corset and held them out to the man. Will 3 rubies be sufficient enough payment? The old man's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets as he looked upon the 3 glittering rubies in her palm. He struggled for words as he held out his own hand. It will most certainly be enough. He conjured as Emea tipped the rubies into his hand. More than enough. Then to Bart it is. Emea smiled and went around the wagon to jump on. The tradesman loaded the last sack of flour before jumping up the front in the driver's seat. Aye. He sang and sat the horse in motion. The wagon started moving, and Emea found herself growing tired from all the excitement. It felt good to know she was finally taking charge of her own life and that no one could stop her. She was off to her future. Soy lady, wake up. Emea snapped out of her slumber and opened her eyes. She quickly discovered that the wagon had stopped and that she was in a dark city, Bart City. We are here, the farmer needlessly said. Emea quickly sat up and straightened her gown. Best find accommodations quick, the farmer advised her. You don't want to be out alone at night in Bart City. Right. The farmer sat his horse in motion and disappeared down the dark street. Emea was left standing in the town square, looking around for something that might be open. All cities had a curfew. After midnight, everything was closed until sunrise. Emea could tell that it was currently very close to midnight based on the moon's position. She had to move quickly. She started hastily walking down the street, keeping her eyes open for even the slightest sign of light. But every inn she walked by was dark and closed and showed no sign of taking late customers. Emea started to worry. What if she didn't find lodging for the night? She would have to spend the night sleeping on the street. What mess had she gotten herself into? Her mind started wondering if she had made the wrong decision leaving Rochas. No sane person would willingly choose to leave a safe future, a wealthy husband, and a legacy like the Rochas heritage. Maybe she should just head back first thing tomorrow. No, she heftily thought. She had committed to this. She didn't want to get married, and she definitely didn't want to stay captive in the shadows of a man. This way, she could choose her own future, and she wanted that more than anything, even if it meant sleeping in the streets for a night. Suddenly, Emea was brought out of her thoughts when she heard something behind her. She whipped around, but it was too dark to see anything. The houses of Bart were casting shadows dark enough to hide anyone who might be following her. She narrowed her eyes, but decided to keep going. If she just kept moving, maybe she would find someone who she might be able to pay for a place to sleep. She headed down a new street, turning a corner to a new dark road. Behind her, she could sense someone following her, perhaps several people, but she refused to let it scare her and kept going. As she continued down the dark streets with no signs of people in sight, she started to feel a cold sweat run down her back, though. What if they attacked her? She hadn't packed any weapons, how foolish of her really, so she could not defend herself. Never mind the fact that she had never held a sword in her life. How was she going to cope if they decided to corner her? As if fate wanted to punish her for leaving her home, Emea found herself stumbling into a dead-end alley. She was trapped. When she heard obvious footsteps approaching, she turned around and faced 3 dark shadows coming closer. Finally, she stopped moving. One of them mumbled. It was a man. It sounded like he wasn't much older than herself. I was getting tired of all this running around. Another one added. Here, here. Yes, 3 men. They were heading towards her and she had nowhere to run. She was really in a pickle now. Emea backed up to the end of the alley, keeping a few feet's distance to the back wall. She clutched her satchel like her life depended on it, which it might actually did. She kept her cool as the men closed in. "What's a fine woman like you doing here in Bart?" the first man asked. The faint moonlight showed that he was quite bulky, strong. "I'm..." Her voice died on her tongue as one of the others stepped forward. "Look at that. That is a brilliant specimen of woman, right there." He contributed and tilted his head. Emea's stomach curled into knots. This was turning out badly. "Stay away from me," she warned them feistily. She sounded braver than she was. "Relax, Toots. We only want what's in your bag," the first man spoke again. "Speak for yourself," the second scoffed. "Can we hurry this up?" the third man drawled. "I would like to get home, preferably before dawn, and preferably a little richer, too." "All right, fine," the second man sighed. "Hand us the bag, lady, and nobody gets hurt." "No," Emea snapped. This bag contained everything she needed to survive. Without her gemstones, she wouldn't make it a single day unless she wanted to turn out like these thugs. "You want to do this the hard way." The second man spoke and came closer. "Fine, we can do this the hard way." Emea barely managed to open her mouth, wanting to let out a scream before someone, came out from the shadows and entered the alley. This fourth man didn't seem to be a part of the group. His body was dressed in black and cloaked in a black cape. Furthermore, his entire face was hidden behind a mask and a hood, at least from what Emea could make out from the sparse moonlight. Who was he? The thugs seemed to wonder the same thing. "Who the hell are you?" snapped the second man. He had turned to face him. Emea now noticed how he subtly drew a small dagger from his belt. She hadn't noticed he had been armed before now. "To hell with who he is. Let's get rid of him," the third man barked. All of them seemed to react by this. Emea watched as the 3 men walked up to the cloaked figure, all drawing concealed weapons from their belts. She didn't know who this cloaked man was or why he was interfering, but in any case she was both glad and scared at the same time. Glad that someone cared enough and wanted to save her, but mostly scared that he was outnumbered 3-1. This couldn't possibly end well. "Don't hurt him," Emea called out, making all 3 of the thugs turn to look at her. And in that moment, the cloaked man went into action. He worked so fast that Emea barely saw what he was doing. One moment he was standing quietly and calmly, surrounded by 3 armed thugs. The next he had drawn 2 small, but robust sticks from his cape. He whirled around and started attacking the thugs with flying movements. The thugs had all missed the first few acts of his attack because they had been facing towards Emea. But as soon as the cloaked man started going at them, they all jumped into action. Emea stifled a scream and stumbled back against the wall as she helplessly watched how the 3 men were about to kill another man. But, to her surprise, the cloaked man looked to be having the upper hand at all times, avoiding their daggers and punches, only to hit them with his sticks. Why he had chosen to fight their blades with sticks was a puzzle to her. He had to be armed with real weapons too, right? Moments later, all three of the thugs were unconscious and on the ground. Everything had happened so fast that Emea had barely been able to tell what was going on. The dim moonlight had only provided her with glimpses of the fight. The rest had blurred into dark, fast-moving shadows. Now, with the cloaked man as the only one standing, he looked towards Emea. Her body stiffened as he took a few steps towards her. What was his deal? Had he only attacked the men and saved her so he could take the content of her bag for himself? Or was his agenda much, much darker? Emea stumbled back frightened when the cloaked man approached her. He then suddenly stopped up, perhaps noticing her flinch away from him. After all, he had just effortlessly beaten 3 armed men into the ground with only 2 sticks. She had the right to feel scared. For a moment, it seemed that the cloaked man was simply watching her. Emea stared back at him, too afraid to move. Her voice only returned when she had but one question in her head. "Who are you?" she croaked. The cloaked man didn't reply. He suddenly just started searching for something under his cloak, which made Emea involuntarily flinch again. Was he going to attack her? But to her surprise, the cloaked man simply pulled out something and tossed it onto the ground, a few feet away from her. Her eyes dropped to the small object and found herself staring at a small dagger, still in its scabbard. Why was he giving her that? She looked up with new questions on her mind, but was shocked when she saw the alley was empty. The 3 thugs were still very much unconscious, but the cloaked man had disappeared. Emea was stunned and started looking around the shadows. "Hello?" she called, hoping he might respond. But nothing, he was gone. Emea looked down at the dagger again and slowly moved forward to pick it up. She pulled the little knife out of its leather protection and looked at the beautifully crafted blade. There were no sign of a mark that might reveal where it was forged, only the handle that had a tiny little leaf carved into it. It was amazingly detailed. Why had the cloaked man given it to her? And why had he saved her? She hadn't even had the chance to express her gratitude. She looked down the empty street again. She hoped that she might someday see him again and get a chance to say. She needed to keep moving. Tonight's events had startled her, but it hadn't made her want to give up and run back home. If anything, it had perked her desire to change the world. She needed to find Dashiell so she could stop wandering helplessly around, but it would seem that she wouldn't find a place to sleep indoors tonight. So, with a little luck and help from an angel, she found a remote and hidden place to sleep behind a wagon and a few barrels. Here, she could sleep unnoticed by thugs and other people who might want to disturb her. Funnily enough, she dreamt of a cloaked figure who was shrouded in thick fog. When she called out for him, the fog only got thicker until it was so thick that he completely disappeared. What could that possibly mean? The first thing Emea did after the sun arose was hit the local taverns and start asking about a guy named Dashiell. Most of the people she asked simply shrugged their shoulders, while others pretended to know him if she in return would give them a little something. Imaya's persistence never wavered, though. Eventually, she knew she would find them. Although Bart was a relatively small city, it had somehow gotten bigger over the years. Houses were built up against houses, and small stores had been crammed into every empty nook and corner. Inns after inns on a row, all of them which claimed they hadn't seen Dashiell or anyone who matched his description. As morning turned to noon, and noon turned to evening, Imaya still hadn't found him, nor had she found anyone who had heard about their rebellion. Suddenly, the night was upon them, and closing hours were just a few short hours away. After a long day, Imaya had to admit that she wouldn't find them today. She decided that it would be best to get herself signed into a room so she would avoid a repetition of last night's unfortunate events. She stepped into a small inn called the Brewing Kettle that seemed nice and well accommodated. The innkeeper was looking through his book when Imaya stepped up to the counter. He looked up when Imaya stopped in front of him. "What can I do for you, Toots?" "Could I get a room for the night, please?" Imaya asked, smiling carefully. Manners never hurt. "Just for one," the innkeeper asked with a skeptical brow. Imaya nodded, and the innkeeper then started going through his book again. "We have a room for 9 shillings a night. And how would you expect to pay?" He grunted, looking at her in disgust. Obviously, hosting lone women were not something he approved of. "How would 2 emeralds sound?" Imaya asked and curled her lip into a smirk. He thought he would have the pleasure of seeing her stutter her way through a plea to stay for the night. Women weren't allowed money, but he hadn't expected her to be carrying gems. The innkeeper widened his eyes. 2 emeralds, that'll do mighty fine. Imaya nodded, pleased with herself. "Then find me a key." She was surprised how confident she sounded. This was a side of her she didn't know existed. Surprising, what a little freedom could do to you. The innkeeper started going through his keys to look for an appropriate room. It was that moment Imaya overheard a couple of men talking, sitting by a table a few feet away. And then he started asking me if I wanted a new future for myself and my future children. A large, bearded man grunted while chugging down a mug of ale. Imagine my surprise when he tells me that their little group can do just that. That was the first word she had of them since she got here. Maybe this pack knew where they were. "Excuse me," Imaya carefully said and stepped up to their table. The 3 other men looked up at her, their eyes blurry from their beverage. "But could you by any chance be talking about the rebellion?" The bearded man rose a bushy brow. "As a matter of fact, I am. How would a lady like you know about such things?" He questioned and scratched his beard. Imaya didn't think she needed to tell him about her reasons. "Do you know where they are staying at?" "Well, the man I talked to, Hank, his name was, said that they were staying at the Quilted Cow and that I should stop by if I changed my mind," the bearded man hoarsely replied. "What's it to you?" Imaya broke into a huge smile. "It's all the way across town," the man grunted. "It's in the northern part of the city." "There we go. Here's your key." The innkeeper suddenly spoke and held up a key. Imaya turned to look at him. "I'm sorry, I won't be needing it after all." She was certain that she could make it across town before closing hours. She knew she would have to hurry, but she could definitely make it. But what about my emeralds? The innkeeper complained and looked saddened by the loss of his promised fortune. Emea quickly reached into her bag, ripped 2 emeralds off from her corset and tossed them on the counter. For your inconvenience. The innkeeper looked gobsmacked as Emea headed out the door. She knew she could make it, but she had to run most of the way. The Quilted Cow was up north, and even though Bart was small, as previously mentioned, it had gotten bigger somehow. It took her nearly 20 minutes before she reached the far end of the city. By then, she was exhausted. She had run most of the way, but now she was almost there. She had no idea where the inn was at, so she would have to stop and ask for directions. And just her luck. She noticed an open tavern where a few men were hanging out in front of the bar, chatting lively with each other and drinking ale. She could ask them. "Excuse me," she asked and walked up to them. They all turned to look at her, suddenly all getting a surprised look on their face. "Can you tell me in which direction the Quilted Cow is?" One of the men, a black-haired, brutish-looking man with muscles as big as a log, crooked his head and offered her a smirk. Of course, beautiful, anything for a fine lady. Emea felt an uncomfortable tightening in her stomach. Everything he said was nice, yet something about him made her skin crawl. Why don't we show you?" The brute man offered and looked around to his lads. "It's getting pretty late. You don't want to be alone on the street with dangerous men around." Emea knew she should decline. "I think I will manage on my own. Just point me in the right direction." "Nonsense, we don't mind now, do we, lads?" He barked and turned to his friends. They all smirked and nodded their heads. "It's only a few houses away, we will show you." Only a few houses? Maybe she could take their company for only a few houses. Worst case scenario, she had her trusty little dagger. All right then, lead the way. Suddenly, she was heading down the street with 4 men she didn't know. She realized she had made a dumb move. They were up to trouble, but her faith in humanity kept her believing that she could make it to the Quilted Cow before they tried something stupid. But the few houses away description didn't quite seem to hold. After several minutes of getting led by the brute and his friends, she realized they were moving further away from town and into the outer part. After a couple more seconds, she nervously asked, "Where is it? I think we might be getting lost." "Oh no, it's right down there," the brute said and pointed down a narrow street. "Just at the end, you can't miss it." "So, no trouble." Emea quickly headed down the narrow street, enveloping herself into the darkness. Damn Bart City for not having any street lights. She never thought she would be happy to escape into the darkness, but that guy had given her the creeps. Besides, eventually she would find the Quilted Cow, and she still had some time before closing hour. So what was a little darkness? But as she kept walking down the narrow street, it only seemed to get darker. The houses were keeping the road ahead covered in darkness, so she could hardly see where she was going. That was, until she reached a sudden dead end. She had walked right into a trap. "Would you like to know what I enjoy most in this world?" She suddenly heard the brute's voice say from somewhere behind her in the dark. They had followed her, and she hadn't even noticed. Naive bitches who are dumb enough to ask men like me for direction, he told, stepping out of the shadows. Emea turned around and saw 4 dark outlines moving towards her. This was not good. She backed up into the alley and felt her breath hitch when the back wall started to close in on her. This was déjà vu. But my absolutely favorite thing in this magnificent world, the brute continued, still coming closer, is when that bitch is a fucking busty woman who just so happens to have a nice face. Emea felt her stomach churn as the brute stopped in front of her, now only a few feet away. His friends stayed a little in the back, obviously because he was their leader. She knew she had acted dumbly tonight, letting them show her the way. This was her own doing for trusting them. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her little dagger and fiercely pointed it towards him. "Stay away from me. I told you you shouldn't be hanging around dangerous men this late," the brute mocked with a grin, looking at her little dagger. "But you didn't take my advice. If you're stupid enough to walk up to a man like me this late, you have it coming, Toots." Emea whimpered as he came closer and reached out for her. She automatically stepped backwards, but was hit in the back by the wall. There was no distance between them now, and the brute took it to his advantage and swiftly grabbed her hand. "Let me go," she shouted at him and tried to wiggle her hand out of his filthy palm. The brute squeezed her wrists so tightly, she cried out from pain and was forced to drop the knife. It fell to the ground with a soft thump and made the brute laugh grimly. "Whoopsie, eh?" He mocked and snaked his arm around her waist. "I guess it's just you and me then." "Let go, you greasy pig." Emea raged and tried to fight his strong grip. "What did you just call me?" The brute snapped. He thrust her hard up against the wall and dragged a whimper from her lips as he let go of her hips and instead grabbed her throat. "You filthy little bitch. You have no right to speak to me like that. You're an ugly and brainless swine who's going to rot in hell." Emea spat back at him, but then immediately regretted it. Talking back to an angry man was definitely not a good idea. Pure rage lit up in the brute's face, and then he squeezed her neck so tight she couldn't breathe. "You're going to be sorry you said that," he hissed into her ear. "Get on your fucking knees." He pulled her by her throat, whirled her around, and thrashed her into the ground with all his strength. Emea screamed and landed face first on the dusty ground. Luckily, she managed to break a little of the fall with her hands, but she felt how her knees hurt badly. "That's right, bitch. Right where you belong," she heard the brute say from somewhere above her. "On your hands and knees beneath a man." She had to escape somehow. She begun to crawl away, but the brute stepped on her dress and made her fall back on the ground, chin first. "Going somewhere," he mused before she suddenly felt his weight crawl on top of her. "Not before I'm done with you." "No," she cried out when he grabbed the back of her neck and forced her head to stay on the ground. His palm captured her hand before he smashed it into the ground and leaned down to her ear. "You're going to regret calling me names, bitch," he growled into her ear. "I'm going to teach you a hard lesson." He let go of her hand and started moving it under her stomach, down to her pelvis. "Get off me," she shrieked and felt how her entire body begun shaking. She was more scared than she had ever been her entire life. She got saved yesterday, but she doubted she would strike lucky twice. "Oh, I will get off." The brute growled into her neck as his hand started pushing her rear against his crotch. "I'll get off so hard, you won't be able to walk again." She felt something hard grind against her rear, but couldn't explain what it was. Instead, she started struggling and crying for help. "Shut up," the brute snapped and tightened his grip on her neck. "I'm going to fuck you so hard that your cunt will never look the same again. My cock is going to be forever imprinted inside your stupid little pussy, and you're going to feel me every time you fucking move." Emea felt her stomach threaten to spill out her mouth as he groaned when he begun rubbing against her again. "MHMMM," he hummed into her ear and made the hairs on her back stand up. "I think I'll fuck you so good that you can't walk." From the front, from the back, she felt the hard thing grind against her arse. "You'll have to have someone carry you around on their dick after I'm done with you." He breathed and licked her ear. "Do you want me to carry you around on my dick?" Bile were rising in her throat by every word he said. She had never heard such foul language in all her life. Even though he probably meant every word he said, the most terrifying thing was still being so defenseless. She could do nothing but lie there and listen. "This is going to hurt so much." He laughed grimly. "You're going to scream off the top of your lungs and you're going to beg for mercy." His hand started moving from her front to her back, and suddenly she could feel how he was searching for the hem of her dress. "Beg me for mercy, bitch. Beg." "No," she yelled and started struggling again. She tried to push herself off the ground with her hands, but his grip on her neck only made it so much more painful. Too painful. "I call second," she heard one of his friends say. "She won't be struggling so hard by the second time." "That's fine by me," the brute replied and smiled wryly. "I like them wild. It only makes the conquest so much better." His hand found the edge of her dress, and she felt how his hand traveled up her inner thigh. She knew she was finished. There was no stopping it. She had run out of ways to get away, and now she was going to die, simply because she wouldn't get married. Suddenly, marriage didn't seem so bad. All of a sudden, there was a short sound of something whistling through the air. Then, one of the men burst out a wail of pain. Emea whipped her eyes up to look at the guy who had cried out, and found him clutching his arm where an arrow had embedded itself. Blood was pouring down his arm, and suddenly she saw a cloaked figure land on the ground. He had jumped off the roof of a building and landed perfectly on his feet. The men around him immediately drew their weapons from their scabbards and headed towards him. Emea recognized the cloaked figure as her savior from last night when he whipped around and made a circle kick to one of the men who was pointing a dagger at him. He struck him in his face with his foot and made the man stagger backwards, disoriented. The cloaked man then reacted quickly and turned around when the two others were still hot on their toes. She hardly saw him pull out something from under his cloak before the items were thrown with immense speed towards one of the men. The man with the arrow in his arm started clutching his thigh now and decided this was too much for him. He limbered off and left the cloaked man with two opponents. The last guy didn't have a weapon, so he went for the cloaked man with his fists. He aimed for the cloaked man's head, but the cloaked man quickly leaned back on his heels and avoided the punch. Instead, he swung his leg under the other man's knees and made him fall on his arse in a bundle of confusion. The guy who the cloaked man had circle-kicked was coming to his senses and drew his dagger once more. The cloaked man was one step ahead and drew a dagger from his cloak and aimed it towards the man's arm. It struck him perfectly, and the pain made the man drop his own dagger to clutch his wounded arm. The cloaked man used his momentary agony to his own advantage and grabbed the guy's sword hand and bent it to an uncomfortable angle until it snapped and broke with an uncomfortable sound. The man cried out and took a few steps back before he followed his friend's wise action and ran away. The brute who had been lying on top of Amaya now jumped off her and headed for the cloaked man himself. He was pissed as hell as he grabbed his own dagger and lunged towards the mystery man. The cloaked man saw him coming and quickly avoided his stab. He then drew yet another dagger from his cloak before thrusting it straight into the pit of the brute's stomach with a loud growl. He wrenched it around, digging it deeper. The brute froze. Amaya saw how his hands came to his stomach where the cloaked man's dagger sat. He stumbled a few steps back with a horrified look on his face. He hadn't seen this coming. Blood was pouring from the wound and gushed down his stomach, down to his breeches. He collapsed to his knees. The cloaked man simply kicked him down onto the ground with his foot until he landed flat on his back with blank eyes. Dead. He had killed him. Amaya sank to the ground and curled herself up against the wall. He had killed him. The cloaked man had killed him. She had just witnessed a murder. Granted, it had been the murder of someone who had just tried to rape her, but it still had a horrifying impact on her. She had never seen anyone die before her eyes. Now all that was left of the brute was the blank, shocked expression on his face. He looked so hauntingly scary. Amaya barely had time to think before one of the men came back. He was silently closing up on the cloaked man who was paying attention to the dead body in front of him. He hadn't noticed him coming. "Look out!" Amaya shrieked as the man grabbed a knife and started charging the cloaked man. The cloaked man reacted fast and spun around, quick enough to avoid being stabbed. He jumped away, and from out of nowhere, he produced a bow and arrow from under his cloak. The man with the knife had momentarily lost balance, but quickly regained it, only to find the cloaked man pointing his arrow at him. He raised his knife, but stopped as the cloaked man tightened his bow. "I dare you." The voice was so melodic, yet at the same time lethal and cold. It carried no trace of fear. It was calm and collected, yet hard and murderous. It was the cloaked man speaking for the first time. It was such a deep and beautiful voice, though at the moment it was telling the brute's friend to back the hell away. The brute's friend seemed to be considering his chances with the arrow, but the cloaked man didn't flinch or show any sign of backing down. He firmly stood his ground, his arrow pointing directly between the guy's eyes. The brute's friend made the logical decision and dropped his weapon. "Good choice," the cloaked man growled, almost animalistic. "Now run before I change my mind about letting you go." The guy didn't need to hear that twice. He put his legs into good use and ran away down the street, far, far away. Once he had disappeared, the cloaked man unarmed his bow and placed it back under his cloak. He seemed completely calm, Emea noticed, and she watched him as he slowly turned around and gazed in her direction. She was still frozen in her fetal position, shaking from top to toe. Maybe the cloaked man felt her fright when he seemed to linger on his feet. Emea was too scared to move or even speak when the cloaked man suddenly started coming her way. Her curiosity was fighting with her scare as he carefully stopped in front of her and crouched down to her level. For the first time, she looked upon him. He wore a mask that covered his entire face, except his eyes, along with his hooded cloak and gloved hands. She couldn't tell the color of his hair or even the color of his skin, only that he had the brightest eyes she had ever seen. In truth, his eyes were probably blue, but the moonlight made them look silvery white and shining, like crystals. They were framed by a thick set of black lashes that balanced out the whiteness of his eyes. They looked into her eyes and slowly blinked as they studied her. "Are you all right?" he suddenly said. She saw the indication of his lips move behind the mask as he slightly tilted his head to the side, waiting for her reply. Emea was stunned. His voice was the most melodious baritone she had ever heard, a velvet smooth and enchanting tone. It sounded so calm and collected that she wondered how the voice of an angel could belong to the warrior she had seen just a moment ago. She realized he was still waiting for a reply, so with a shaky voice, she answered, I'm fine." He didn't respond to her words, but simply watched her as her heart slowed down its pace. When the rush finally left her body, it left her with nothing but questions in her head. "You saved me," she breathed and looked into his eyes. "You saved me." Why? You saved me last night, too." She saw a flicker of recognition in the cloaked man's eyes, and suddenly she could tell he was smiling. "I remember," he said, and gently brushed a stray hair out of her face. "I've never seen so much fire in my life." Fire. She looked down at her hair, and it suddenly occurred to her how her hair must have stood out amongst the crowd, like a wolf amongst sheep. "Oh, you're right," she said and touched the tip of her braid that was coming apart. "I didn't think about how my hair would probably bring me attention." "I wasn't talking about your hair." She looked up into his eyes and found him staring into hers. His eyes were so intense, and since it was the only thing she could see of him, it made them so much more hypnotizing. It was then that his words registered in her head. The meaning of them made her blush and look down. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. It set her soul on fire again, but it felt different this time. "You shouldn't be out after sunset," the cloaked man suddenly said with a hint of something in his voice. "That's when the bad boys come out to play." She snapped her eyes up to his and noticed how his eyes had changed again. There was a spark of something in them. "You're up after sunset," she bravely replied and furrowed her brows. "Are you a bad boy?" She saw the crowfeet by his eyes deepen, indicating he was smirking. "I just saved your life, you tell me." Why was she blushing? "You make a decent point," she murmured and looked down at her hands. "Perhaps I'm bad, too." A simple girl looking to stir some trouble, she offered and looked up at him again. There is nothing simple about you, and I can't see a glimmer of bad in you, he soberly replied, and let the fingertip of his gloved hand run down the length of her braid, his eyes trailing along with it. Which leaves me with the question of what a woman like yourself is doing out so late. A woman like me? Emea asked, feeling insecure under his probing finger. There was something ever so sensual about the way he casually stroked her braid with just one finger, like he was smoothly trailing down a crack in a wall. His crow feet deepened again. Don't insult my intelligence. I can tell you are a woman of wealthy upbringing. What brings you to Bart? He was very observant, she quickly discovered. How he could tell she was rich, she would never know. Her dress was covered in mud, and her hair was dirty from her lack of bathing the last 2 days. She looked like any commoner. I needed to escape my old life, she told truthfully. And as for what I am doing out so late, well, I was looking for an inn called the Quilted Cow. Do you know it? As a matter of fact, I do, the cloaked man responded. But why go there this late? Did you want to get caught out after midnight? Maybe I'm rebellious, Emea answered and felt a smirk creep onto her lips. Or maybe I just wanted to find you again. The cloaked man's head dipped, and suddenly she heard the softest, most beautiful chuckle she had ever heard. Find me? Rebellious? You really are out looking for trouble, aren't you? His statement made her blush, but she refused to let him take her pride. Does that bother you? A woman wanting to break free? Actually, I'd say it was about time, the cloaked man replied and looked up at her. In my opinion, women need to be a little more like you, rebellious. A surprised expression crawled onto her face. He was the first man to ever admit this so openly and casually. Really. Really. Where I am from, women act as freely as men. She didn't even know such a place existed. And where is that? She asked and looked eagerly into his eyes. But to her disappointment, he simply looked back. Not a word crossed his lips. He wasn't telling her anything. Instead, she changed the subject. Who are you? Still no reply. Changing the subject again. Why did you save me? Didn't you want me to? He finally replied. She noticed his left lid pull up slightly, indicating he was raising his brow. Of course I did. Emea breathed shocked. Didn't you see what he was about to do to me? He wanted to. Don't speak another word about it, or my temper might just get away with me again. He growled, suddenly tensing up. His eyes narrowed, and she noticed a flicker of anger in them. Men like him is the reason I'm out here protecting the streets. Why are you? Emea curiously asked. You risked your life to save me. Why do you do that? Because nobody else does, he simply replied. His eyes wavered and flipped down to her braid again. He started curling it around his index finger, spinning a lock of red hair around it. It was such a beautiful contrast to his sleek black glove. Emea swallowed dryly. Breathing had become difficult for a second there, and her stomach felt oddly tense. What was going on? She was about to open her mouth, but suddenly his hand withdrew from her hair. I think we have spent enough time out here in the dark, don't you think? He murmured and begun to withdraw from her. He rose to his feet and held out a hand. She looked surprised up at him, her mouth half open. He looked devilishly handsome from her current point of view. The thick leather armor he was wearing rippled down his stomach and traced a subtle outline of what was a lean body. His frame wasn't very broad, but every fiber of his being expressed enormous strength, not to mention incredible power and agility. His arm, the one that was currently outstretched, waiting for her hand, was tightly packed with muscles, hidden under a protective layer of armor. She hesitantly reached out and placed her hand in his. "You're right. I should get on." She noticed a faint indication of a smile behind his mask before his hand folded around hers and pulled her to her feet with surprising strength. "I'll keep my eyes on you until you get to your inn." In the meantime, he released her hand, only to bend down and quickly grab the dagger he had given to her the night before. It was still lying on the ground where she had dropped it. "Keep this on you at all times while in Bart. I'll advise you to leave this city as soon as possible." He held out the dagger in his gloved hand, waiting for her to take it. Emea softly took the knife and clutched it tightly. "It's just a dagger." "I meant for saving me." She cut in and took a step closer to him. For some reason, she felt oddly drawn to him. She knew she shouldn't, given the fact that he had just murdered a man. He was dangerous. "You saved me twice within the last 2 days. I can't. Just don't make it a third." "I promise I won't," she soberly replied. After tonight, she would hopefully not have to be alone again. Dashiell and the rest of them would take her under their wing, and together they would change the world to a safer place. The cloaked man nodded. "Go down that road, turn right, and then turn left. You'll find the Quilted Cow there." He gave her one last glance before he started walking away. "Stay safe." Emea nodded, and as soon as she had, he bolted off. He disappeared into the night and left her alone once again. There were so many of her questions he hadn't answered. Mostly she wanted to know who he was and also wanted to see what was behind that mask. Why was he hiding his face? And what was his real reasons for roaming the streets, saving people? She hoped this wouldn't be the last time she saw him. She wanted to know him and see him at least one more time. Hopefully, fate would be kind enough to bring him her way again. Finding the Quilted Cow had been easy after the cloaked man had given her the correct directions. She had reached the inn in the absolute last moment as the innkeeper was locking the door. It took some persuasion and a small amount of her fortune to get a room this late, but eventually the innkeeper had caved and let her in. Emea was looking forward to spending the night in a real bed after a good long bath. After her last 2 difficult nights, she needed a good washdown and hopefully could scrub a few of the bad memories away, too. Though one memory she didn't let go of, meeting her mystery savior. Emea had barely stepped inside the inn before she, in the far corner of the tavern, saw a person she recognized. It was Dashiell, and he was with Hank and 2 other men whom she didn't know. It was just her luck that they were still up. "Dashiell," she called and eagerly headed towards him. By the sound of his name being called out, he looked up and around until his eyes landed on her. What are you doing here?" he said, surprised, and stood up from his chair. The men around the table all turned to look at her as well. They looked less enthusiastic than Dashiell. You told me to come if I changed my mind. Emea smiled. So here I am. Unbelievable, Dashiell exclaimed and burst into a wide smile. I can't believe you actually came. You seemed so determined to stay. Things changed, Emea curtly replied and looked at the watching crowd. I hope your offer still stands. I don't know if I can ever return home now. Of course it still stands. Dashiell grinned, but it was cut off by the man Hank, clearing his throat. And what offer is that, Dash? He bickered and shot him a skeptical glare. I told her she could join us, Dashiell said and held out a chair next to him, offering Emea to sit down. I met her in Rochas, and I thought she could be of help to us. Ye did what? Hank shouted and nearly choked on his own saliva. Since when did it become ye, choice who we recruit and who we don't? Oh, come on, Hank. We both know that we could use a woman in our ranks, Dashiell snapped as Emea hesitantly sat down. She wasn't sure she was welcome. She is a fine, decent woman with her heart in the right place. What's is the problem? The problem? Hank seethed. She is a bloody woman, that's the problem. If I wanted a woman's blood on my hands, I would lay with me wife on her bleeding days. He shouted vigorously. How could you think of inviting a woman to our group? Hank, she made a very valid point to me back in Rochas, Dashiell argued. She asked if we in this new world of ours allowed women a voice to speak. It got me thinking, if we are fighting for all mankind, should that not also involve women then? Hank seemed to be having a heart attack. He opened and closed his mouth multiple times before he eventually closed it. He was also turning a violent crimson color. Emea thought this might be a good time to intervene. Excuse me, might I speak? She asked and looked to the other two men who seemed to be quite taken aback as well. Speak your mind, Dash said and nodded. Emea was glad about his encouragement, and it only helped her get the words out of her mouth. I don't wish to be a bother, but after what Dashiell told me back in Rochas, she looked gratefully at Dash. I haven't been able to put it off my mind. He spoke greatly about how you wanted to change the world and make a better future for our kids and their kids, and so on. As the carrier of those future children, don't you think that women should have an opinion in this matter as well? Emea asked and raised a pointed brow at all of them. I've left my home because I believe in your cause, and I wish to help you achieve them. I'll help in whatever way I can, she finished and folded her hands on the table. Now she waited for their reply. Hank slowly seemed to be gaining control his of temper. We appreciate ye wanting to help us, but with all due respect, he bickered, how much can a simple woman like yeself do that we men can't do ourselves? Well, Emea hesitantly replied, should she tell them? For once I am a decent cook. I could help with the food, she offered and drew a skeptical look from Hank, secondly. Here went nothing. My full name is Emea Roch, and I am the only heir to Rochas City. My father is Henbane Roch, and he is the lord of Rochas City. All of the men simultaneously dropped their jaws and looked in absolute mortification at her. Dashiell was the first to break the silence. Sweet mother of all the lands, is it true? Ye see what ye have done. Hank suddenly snapped and fired his fist into the table. Yi made the heiress of one of the largest cities abandon her life so she could run around with a group of rebellious men. Are ye happy now? Please, you have to understand that Dash knew nothing about who I was. Emea burst in. I lied and told him I was a seamstress because I knew he would never open up to me about what you and him were up to if he knew who I really was. So ye were spying on us? Hank hissed and curled his upper lip. His eyes pierced hers. I bet she is nothing more than a spy for the king. Who says she won't turn us in for treason and feast of our grilled meat once we get burned on the stake? A little melodramatic now, don't you think? Dashiell mumbled and gave him a look. All we know for sure is that Emea has shown no evil intentions so far. Dash changed his focus to Emea. Are you a spy for the king, Emea? I most certainly am not. Emea scoffed and crossed her arms, honestly a little offended that they would consider her working for that man. Ragnar has never brought anything but misery to his kingdom, and I have never approved of his reign. I want him off the throne as much as you do. She informed them and pursed her lips. Hank still didn't seem convinced of her true nature. It could all be lies. Why should we believe ye? She could tell he needed a good reason, and she knew exactly how to persuade him. I am the sole heir to Roches. By leaving Roches, it now stands without a legitimate heir. Why would I endanger my father's land by doing something so crazy? Maybe because ye are crazy, Hank suggested flatly. Hey, Emea exclaimed and pointed a finger at him. You are the ones who's trying to change the kingdom from the inside out. I don't think you have the right to call me crazy. Ye left a bloody legacy. Hank shouted profusely. Why on earth would a maiden like Yezelf want to hang around a group of stinking, old, nasty, flea-written? All right, Hank, why don't you order another mug of ale? Dashiell interjected with another look. Let's take this conversation back down to the roots. He turned and looked at Emea. Are you sure you want this? You'll be putting yourself in a great amount of danger. We'll of course keep you safe, but still, the odds of getting a scrape or two aren't completely out of the question. Emea had already considered all this, and therefore her answer was easy. I'm positive. I don't want any special treatment because I'm a lady. I've left my home and thus left my title. I want to be one of you, she said and looked around the group. That's my future. Hank made a grimace and tried to form a sentence that was clearly on his mind. But me, lady, ye don't know how to handle a sword and ye don't have any money to contribute. As far as I can see, ye will only burden us with ye presence. She had to admit that hurt a little. The last thing she wanted was to be a deadweight around their feet, but then again, Hank didn't know about the content of her satchel. She started determined and folded her hands on the table. I may not know how to wield a sword, but I'll learn. Second of all, the so-called burden you name me to become won't happen. She assured him and allowed herself to smile. My name can open many doors. It's well respected. If anything, my presence could improve your chances of gaining the people's trust. I might even be able to convince the wives to let their husbands fight for a good cause, she pointed out, knowing how Hank loved his wife dearly. So there's that. And as for the no-money bit, she paused and smirked before she pulled her bag up to the table. I made sure to pack cleverly before I left dear Roches. The men all looked curiously as Emea opened the bag and revealed the content. Simultaneously, all four men dropped their jaws as they peered into the bag. The candlelight from the chandelier above the table gave an illuminating effect to the small treasure she was hiding. The gemstones all glittered and sparkled in the satchel, giving all the men a soft look in their eyes. By the cold sea, Hank whispered, horrified, after a moment of total silence. I have never seen so many rubies in my life. Holy God, Dash murmured and closed his mouth. You took these from your parents. Technically, they were mine, Emea said and closed the satchel again. Once she was satisfied they had seen what needed to be seen. The corset belonged to me and so did the jewelry. Needless to say, this fortune will be able to buy us food, weapons, clothes, anything we need, really. She looked at Hank, who still seemed in a daze of shock. So what do you say? Can I join you? Hank finally seemed to snap out of his frozen state and looked with wide eyes at her. I suppose that ye could be helpful after all. But not just because you bring great fortune, Dashiell quickly added. I'm sure you'll be able to teach us a thing or two about manners in the different cities, am I right? No doubt you have great knowledge of the city's different traditions. He suggested and raised a brow. That she did. If there was anything she had learned during her homeschooling, it was how to behave in every city across Senworth Kingdom. Each city had different customs, and some people even wore different clothes from other cities. A few even spoke different tongues. Tongues that Emea had trained day and night back in Roches at her mother's orders. Suddenly, it would seem that her mother's strict tutelage would be put into good use. Indeed I do, Emea confirmed and nodded firmly. Trust me, I'll be of help if you need me to. Then let's settle on this, Dashiell said and turned to Hank, who was a little flabbergasted. Emea comes with us. We'll keep her safe, and in return, she'll provide us with her wisdom and share her fortune to all of our benefits. Agreed. Emea could live with those terms. Agreed. They both turned and looked at Hank, who chewed on something. He looked down at his hands before he finally sighed. All right, but I want one thing to be of the clear. He said and pointed a fat finger towards Emea. I refuse to have woman's blood on my hands. If ye, for some reason, should perish, I want it to be heard. I washed my hands in this. He looked sincerely at both Dashiell and the two other men sitting at the table, then finally at Emea. I can vouch for that. Emea smiled and stuck out her hand. Your hands are clean. Then I would suggest ye get a room for the night before they close up. Hank nodded determinedly and took Emea's hand and shook it. Welcome to the rebellion. It was a new day and the sun was shining, but even despite the quiet night and fairly decent mattress at the Quilted Cow, Emea had barely slept. She was about to embark on a new adventure, and she could hardly wait. She had never felt so free, so perfectly at the right place. It was thrilling. So that morning, when she had met up with the rest of the men, the last thing on her mind was trouble. Yet, as they walked out of the inn and onto the busy morning streets of Bart, trouble was straight ahead. Goo, Emea. Dashiell hesitantly hummed while staring at a lamppost. I think you might want to take a look at this. Emea looked confused towards him, just as the rest of the men did. What is it? We've got a problem. The whole group walked up to the lamppost, curious at what had caught Dashiell's attention. Emea herself stepped up to what appeared to be a poster of some sort, a poster with her name and face painted on it. "Oh my God," Emea exclaimed and slapped a hand in front of her mouth. "I think maybe your parents are looking for you." That they were. Above the sketch of her face, huge, bold letters read, "Have you seen this woman?" And the information below informed citizens of Senworth Kingdom that a bounty of no less than 1 gold coins would be handed out to whoever brought Emea back safe and sound. Letting her eyes slide across the town, she noticed almost every lamppost had her face on it. They must have put it up during the night. Ye see what happened. Hank barked and ripped down the poster. He shoved it into Dashiell's face. That's what happens when ye bring a lady along on a night's mission. Calm down, Hank. We didn't know this would happen, Dashiell said and shoved the poster away. On the contrary, I knew something like this would happen. For God's sake, she's an heiress. What did ye expect? Ye think her parents would just think, oh well, that's a shame, and let the poor lass run off. I swear I didn't think my parents would react like this. Emea cut in and bit her lip, I thought. Well, I thought that they would understand. I wrote them a letter. A letter? Hank snorted, oh yeah, that'll keep them warm at night. Seriously, what were you thinking, me lady? Oh God, what had she been thinking? There was a bounty on her head, and people in this city wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to get their hands on 1 gold coins. She was now the most wanted woman in this part of the kingdom. All right, listen. I think we need to calm down. Dashiell sighed and looked at her, Emea. Are you still up for this whole adventure? I understand if you would rather return home. No, Emea snapped fiercely. I've come this far and I'm not letting a bounty stop me. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Well, perhaps you should start off by putting on your hood, Dashiell carefully suggested and shifted his eyes to her hair, locks that red stand out in a crowd. Emea instantly pulled on her hood. Good point. And next, we need to leave town, Dashiell continued and then shifted his eyes to Hank, who was still fuming. Are you all right with that? Hank seemed to be struggling with some profanities, but finally he let out a harsh breath. All right, fine. Let's head for the woods. Just as well anyway, I'm tired of Bart's underbrewed ale. Then towards the gate, Dashiell nodded to the men who pulled their satchels higher on their shoulders. Let's go. Aide drawn by me, as I imagine him. They all settled down for the night in some woods not too far away from Bart. They had unpacked their tents from their carriage and set up camp. It was now after sunset, but Emea was restless. How was she supposed to sleep knowing that she was hunted? Every time she heard a twig snap, she turned and looked for a figure. She knew no one was there, but from time to time, her imagination got away with her, and she swore she could see a silhouette. The men were still gathered around the fire, talking, laughing, even like nothing was wrong. She turned over on the ground and gazed hopelessly into the woods. This was going to be a long night. But just as she was about to shut her eyes, she saw something, and this time she was sure it wasn't a figment of her imagination. Emea sat straight up, certain that she had seen a hooded figure. It was dark. Only the dim light from the fire lit up the branches and shaped weird shadows across the woods. She narrowed her eyes and focused. She was certain someone was there. Suddenly, she heard a twig snap behind her, and she whipped around, quick enough to see a human shape disappear behind some trees. That was it. Emea shot to her feet and headed for the fire. The men were still casually talking, as if they didn't have a care in the world. "Hank," she called as she ran towards them. Hank, who was sitting next to Dash, turned in his seat and looked eerily at her distressed figure. "What's the matter? Something in the woods stirred ye, sleep, lass." Emea stopped in front of the men who piped down to hear her out. "I saw someone. Just now in the woods. I couldn't make out the shape, but I'm positive that I saw a cloak." Hank frowned and looked worriedly at her. "We are in deep wilderness, me lady. Are ye sure ye are not just tired? Ye haven't slept for a good time, and the shadows in here." I said I was certain. She snapped and crossed her arms. "I saw the tip of a cloak, but it disappeared behind some trees." "It might just have been an animal," Hank suggested, and turned back to pour himself another mug of warm soup. "Since when do animals wear cloaks?" Emea snapped and took a step closer. "I think you should do a check around the woods." "Listen, why don't ye go back to sleep, eh?" Hank hoarsely chuckled and took a large gulp from his soup. "There's nothing to be worried about. Go get some rest." "I saw someone," she almost shouted at him. Was he being thick? "I know there is someone out there watching us, and you want even go check." "It's me lady." She's right. The voice seemed familiar and came from the outline of the woods. Everyone turned toward the source, including Emea, who gasped from the shock. A man in a long black cloak stepped out from behind a tree and took a few cautious steps forward. When the men reached for their weapons, he stopped and held up two gloved hands. "I come in peace." Emea dropped her jaw. It was him, her mystery rescuer from Bart. How had he found her? He wore his long black cloak and leather armor outfit, but at least from what she could tell, he had taken off his mask, though she couldn't be certain. He kept his head tilted downwards, and the hood of his cloak kept his face hidden. Only the faint outline of his lips and chin were visible for everyone to see. And if those lips weren't the most beautiful lips she had ever seen. "Who the hell is this?" Hank barked and brought Emea out of her thoughts. He held up his sword, despite the cloaked man's assurance. "Wait a minute, I think I know who that is." Dashiell suddenly burst in. He took a few steps towards the stranger who still didn't move. Then his face lit up with recognition. "It's him. It's the one they call Aide." Aide, Emea thought to herself and frowned. She had never heard of a man named Aide. "He has gotten quite a reputation in town," Dash continued as the mysterious man Aide turned his head to look at him. "Just the other day, I heard a man talking about how he had seen him beat 3 men to the ground with just 2 sticks, trying to defend a woman, and then he just walked away without a drop of sweat." Dash finished horrified. "So why should we not fear ye, Aide?" Hank snarled and took a threatening step closer, still pointing his sword towards him. "Ye attacked them. Why shouldn't ye attack us?" Aide turned towards Hank now, but kept his head down. I've come unarmed." Hank scoffed loudly. "And why would ye do that?" Aide suddenly surprised them all by looking up and revealing his face. Emea gasped subtly. He was so young. He couldn't be much older than herself, though his eyes told a different story. The white eyes she remembered from the dark alley, which she had thought would be blue in proper lighting, were indeed white or gray, if you will. His skin was unusually pale, but that could just be from the contrast of his black outfit. There was no questioning how perfectly sculpted his face was, though. Everything, right from the high cheekbones to the straight nose, all the way down to his curved lips, his entire face radiated regal beauty. Something inside his crystal orbs made Emea feel a strange kind of melancholic sadness, though like he was grieved or had seen too much in his young life. They looked deep with despair and emotion, haunted by what could be years of torture. Those same eyes ran across their little group until they eventually landed on Emea. The intensity of his piercing eyes made her squirm and blush in her spot. Her eyes automatically wavered and looked down. "I have come here tonight because I heard a rumor in town." Aide's deep voice suddenly spoke. It instantly made Emea look up again and watch how his lips formed the words. "I heard that a group of men were rising against the kingdom in a rebellion." "How did you find us?" Dashiell sharply cut in. "I've been covering up all our tracks and removed any evidence of our trails, and I'm the best at what I do." Aide's eyes landed on Dash again. "I have my own ways." "Why have ye sought us out, then?" Hank bickered and curled his nose into a grimace. "And why creep around the woods?" Aide shifted his eyes to Hank again before he spoke. "I apologize if I have frightened anyone by my sneaking." His eyes instantly landed on Emea, who felt herself blush again. "But I had to take my precautions before announcing my presence. I needed to see who you were." "And," Hank bickered, "what are ye doing here then?" "Simple," Aide said and blinked. "I want to join." That surprised Hank. "I don't trust him." He snapped and looked at his men. "He could be a spy for the king. If he tracked us down this easy, he might be a trained assassin. If what Dash has told us is true, we know he is more than capable of murder," Hank stated firmly and looked to his men, who nodded. How right he was, Emea thought, and involuntarily shivered by the memory of how he had murdered the rapist in the alley. Even if he had been a petty lowlife criminal, she wasn't sure she approved of killing just yet. She was afraid with the path that she had chosen, she would have to get used to it at some point. "I promise you I am not a spy," Aide assured them in a lightly amused voice. "You will understand why." "What is that supposed to mean?" Dashiell snapped. "If what you really believe in and fight for is true, then you shouldn't be bothered by who I am," Aide said. "However, it might scare you." "We don't get scared," Hank spat. "Now tell us who ye are." "Before I show you who I am, I want you to remember what you're fighting for," Aide replied cautiously and gave them all a piercing stare. "Keep an open mind." "Just tell us, lad." Hank snarled impatiently and bobbed his sword. "Brace yourselves," Aide said as he slowly reached for his hood. Emea's heart pounded vigorously in her chest, so loudly she feared people could hear. This was it. She would finally see the face of her rescuer, the face she had so longed to see. Aide gave them all one last lingering look before he closed his eyes. Your whole world is about to change. He punctuated his sentence by pulling off his hood. The entire crowd gasped and all readied their weapons as long silver hair burst free from the cloak and long slender ears appeared. It was impossible, Amaya thought. They had been extinct for decades. But there was no denying it. She looked at the man who had rescued her a few nights ago and remembered him as charming and valiant. It all made so much sense now, why he could do what he could do. He was an elf, and not just any elf. A northern elf. A northern elf. She had never seen one before, but then again, no one had. There was no doubt whatsoever, though. The man they called Aide was a northern elf. Everyone seemed to have gone into a state of shock. Emea gasped and covered her mouth as Aide looked upon them all with calm eyes. Nobody moved or spoke or even breathed. They all just stared, and he stared back. His features were so different from a southern elf's. Emea had only seen one or two southern elves in her life, but the difference was obvious. His skin was lighter and his ears were longer, pointier. His features were also sharper, whereas his cousins had softer, rounder markings. Furthermore, she couldn't recall ever hearing of an elf with silver hair, but she had to admit that she found it quite beautiful. A plain, even silvery gray color all throughout his hair. It was almost hauntingly attractive. Emea was brought out of her daze when everyone seemed to snap out of their shock. All the men lifted their swords and pointed it towards him despite his previous statement of being unarmed. They took a few steps forward, led in the front by Hank. "You're an elf," he shouted, needless to say. "A northern elf. It's impossible." "Obviously not," Aide replied. It was as if he had expected this to happen, and it didn't surprise him one bit. "We killed ye scumbags," Hank continued, getting redder and redder by the second. "We drove ye to ye fucking extinction." "Well, you certainly tried," Aide countered and rose a flat brow. But a few clans were smart enough to hide way up in the Aranhaid Mountains, where no humans could ever travel. It was obvious to anyone with eyes that Hank was losing his last nerve. Emea was scared on behalf of her rescuer, but Aide seemed perfectly calm despite the 30 swords pointing at him. "Ye dare have the nerve to come here and ask to join our group?" Hank roared while the vein in his forehead was close to popping. "Ye kind is the reason we're here fighting." "You're wrong," Aide somberly said. "We had nothing to do with the murder of the old king. We were framed. And now ye insult our intelligence." Hank roared, froth flying around his mouth. "I should kill ye and have ye corpse raised on a stake in town. If you managed to kill me, I would say that you've earned that right," Aide remarked with a sarcastic amusement. "But let's save that futile attempt for another day. I want you to give me the benefit of the doubt long enough for me to explain myself." That request pushed Hank over the edge. "Ye, son of a—" "Stop," suddenly Emea shouted. Everyone turned and looked stunned at Emea. Everyone except Aide, who simply curved a smirk to his lips. That, along with all their stares, made Emea flame up into a vivid red shade. She wasn't used to this sort of attention. Amaya, this is no business for a lady, Hank snapped at her through clenched teeth. Go back to the carriage and stay there. A fire lit up inside her body and made her curl her fists in rage. No, Hank. As I recall, you agreed that everyone should have a voice, even women. Amaya growled and stepped forward. So now I'm speaking. Hank looked as if he had just eaten a lemon. Amaya, don't ye understand? This creature is dangerous. Really? Because from where I'm standing, you're the one holding the sword, Amaya said and stepped up to Aide. Don't go too close, Em. I've heard of the things he can do. Dash hissed sharply when she kept walking closer. He can kill you with his bare hands. I know he can, Amaya said and stepped up in front of Aide until she was standing less than 3 feet away from him. I have seen him do it. The crowd gasped again, but honestly Amaya didn't pay attention. She looked at Aide, who gave her a smile. Somehow it boosted her confidence. What are you saying, Em? Dash asked in shock. Have you met him before? Amaya raised a small brow at Aide, asking him if she could tell them. He nodded and let her speak for him. Was he enjoying it? She turned around and looked at Dash, whose eyes were trained sharply on Aide. He was watching his every breath. Yes, I have, Amaya replied, as a matter of factly. I was the woman he saved from 3 thugs with just 2 sticks. She heard Dash gasp in shock. It was the night before I found you at the Quilted Cow. You were attacked. Dashel snapped harshly in disbelief. Clearly, he was upset about that piece of information. Yes, and if it hadn't been for Aide, I wouldn't be here tonight, she said and turned to look at him again. I owe him my life. Everyone went quiet after that. Aide's lips twitched into a small smile. But me, Lady Hank, who had been silent for a good time now, said in a trying voice, He is an elf, a northern elf. Ye know what they did. I don't care what he says, they are the reason we are fighting today. They ruined the peace and prosperity we had once upon a time. Again, it's all lies. Aide spoke up and broke eye contact with Amaya to look at Hank. We were framed, I told you. If you would just allow me to explain. Why should we? Hank barked. It won't change anything now. Besides, there's evidence from the murder, an arrow to the heart. No human could have ever made that shot. We all know that a bow and arrow is an elf's trademark weapon. We didn't do it, Aide harshly stated. Amaya saw a flicker of anger in his eyes before he took a controlled breath. Let me tell the story from our point of view, the real version. Hank roared a sound of fury, the real. You have a lot of nerve, you filthy. Hank, Amaya intervened. Don't finish that sentence. He snapped and looked furiously at her. He just called us liars. He said we are frauds and that we are to blame for the death of our king. I'm sure that's not what he meant, Amaya sighed. She was getting tired of all this bickering. I say we listen to his story and then pass our judgment. But Dash tried. Enough, Amaya shouted and made everyone shut up. She suddenly discovered how an angry woman could make even the feistiest man hold his tongue. This could be our chance to finally get the truth. The missing pieces of the story, she said, and burned them all with her eyes. Not half an hour ago, I thought that northern elves were extinct, but Aide has proven that to be wrong. The king's men said they had killed all northern elves, so this mean they lied. What else could they have lied about? She asked them. After her little speech, the men went quiet. They all got a thoughtful expression on their face, and clearly all seemed stunned. Obviously, none of them had thought about it that way. So much fire, Aide's voice suddenly whispered behind her. Emea softly gasped and looked over her shoulder to find him standing right behind her. His eyes were shining. She blushed under his gaze and then forced her head to turn back around. His words made her feel stronger than she had ever felt before. It was strange. Hank cleared his throat after a moment. There is no telling if he will give us the truth, he said skeptically. What if he just wants the chance to change our minds long enough for him and his kind to take over the world? I have just revealed the entire existence of my kind. Aide spoke up and looked at Hank. By doing so, I am putting them in great risk. Why would I do that just to waste it on a lie? Emea nodded resolutely. I am with Aide on this one. If you want to kill him, you'll have to kill me, too. Don't even say that, said. We would never harm you but this elf. We know nothing about him. Why should we trust him? Because he trusted us, she snapped back. He came to us, unarmed and carrying an olive branch. He revealed himself because he believed in us enough to trust that we wouldn't harm him. We owe him the same. We don't owe him anything, Hank snarled. Well, I do, Emea said and crossed her arms. He saved my life, so the least I can do is hear him out, especially when we are fighting for everyone to be heard. That didn't include elves. Hank barked angrily. Neither did it include women, Emea sharply pointed out. And yet here I am. And I'm already regretting it, Hank bickered and mumbled a low curse. All right, fine. Let the elf boy speak up. But if it's anything but the truth, I will slit his throat and feed him to the wolves. Again, if you can manage to do that, you have certainly earned it. Aide cut in with a hint of humor laced in his voice. Don't make me change my mind. Hank snapped and thrust his sword back into his holster. Everyone followed his lead and started heading back to the fire. Start spilling, elf, beginning with your name, your real one. I'm afraid I can't, Aide replied halfway to the fire and surprised the group for the millionth time. It's against elf law to speak my name to anyone but my soulmate. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Hank shouted and spat at the ground. Not speaking your name to anyone, but how the hell do people find you if they can't call your name? Emea couldn't disagree more. She thought she had never heard anything so beautiful. That way, the only one who knew their name, their heart, was the person you devoted your life to. And that, in itself, was amazing. Relax, Hank. We have to respect his customs. Emea spoke and looked politely at Aide. May we continue to call you Aide? If you prefer so, Aide replied and took a seat next to her by the fire. If it's all the same to you. Ridiculous. Hank growled while everyone else finally got seated. All of them directed their eyes on Aide as the light of the flames highlighted all of his exotic features. Emea wasn't the only one who was fascinated with his appearance, it would seem. Since a northern elf hadn't been seen in decades, but only described in history books, Everyone was curious to see the real thing. The part Emea found most interesting was the long, pointy attachments that were his ears. They were like spikes in the air, reminding her of small stalagmites. Aide didn't seem to be bothered by their ogling stares as he pulled his gloves off and revealed his pale hands. How beautiful they were, Emea thought to herself, and so skillful. It was those same hands that had casually played with her hair in the alley, and also killed a man. An involuntary shudder ran through her body. All right, let's just get this over with so I can kick ye arse afterwards. Hank bickered and warmed his hands on the fire. Hank, Emea warned him with a growl. Hank granted her with a look before he cringed a little when he saw the hard look on her face. It would seem that Hank's wife wasn't the only one who could make him toe the line. Go ahead, Aide. They all turned towards Aide, who was looking into the fire. He didn't look up as he started speaking. Once upon a time,